My name is Natalie Reyes, and the call came in on a Tuesday afternoon while I was eating a sad desk salad between meetings at the hospital where I work as a compliance administrator. Unknown number, area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish some days that I had. Miss Reyes, this is Todd Bryce with Meridian Recovery Solutions calling regarding your account with Ashford Home Furnishings. We've made several attempts to reach you regarding a past due balance of $14,211. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud at my desk because it was such an obviously wrong number. I've never had an account with Ashford Home Furnishings in my life, I said. I've never even been in an Ashford store. I understand this can be confusing, Todd said, in the flat, rehearsed voice of someone who says this exact sentence 40 times a day. The account was opened using your social security number and date of birth, verified against our records. It's been past due for 11 months. If it remains unresolved, it will be reported to the credit bureaus and could result in legal action. That's the first shock, a collector, calmly informing me I owed $14,000 for furniture I'd never bought, never seen, never signed for. Here's the second, and it landed about 90 seconds later when I asked him, almost as a formality, to confirm the shipping address on file. He read it back to me, not my apartment in Chicago. My parents' house in Naperville, 40 minutes away. The house I grew up in. Quick question before I keep going, no matter where you're watching this from right now, have you ever pulled your own credit report just to check? Drop a yes or no in the comments because after today, I promise you're going to want to. Because that furniture loan wasn't a mistake and it wasn't a one-time thing. It was the first thread I pulled on something that had been quietly unraveling my financial life for 6 years, one account at a time, without me ever knowing a single stitch of it was happening. I should tell you a little about who I was before that phone call because I think it matters. I'm 32, I've worked in hospital compliance administration for almost 7 years, and if you'd asked me a month ago to describe myself in one word, I probably would have said careful. I paid off my student loans 4 years early. I had an emergency fund. I checked my bank balance daily, not out of anxiety but out of habit, the way some people check the weather. I genuinely believed, right up until that Tuesday afternoon, that I understood the full shape of my own financial life. That's what made the phone call feel less like bad news and more like vertigo. It wasn't just that I owed money I didn't owe. It was the sudden, dizzying realization that careful had never actually protected me from anything because the danger hadn't come from outside my life at all. It had come from inside my own family, using the one identity I thought was entirely, unquestionably mine. I hung up with Todd Bryce and sat completely still at my desk for almost a full minute before I did anything else. Then I did what anyone in my position probably would have done. I pulled up annualcreditreport.com on my work laptop, hands shaking slightly, and requested my full credit file from all 3 bureaus. It took 2 days to come through. When it did, I printed all 41 pages and spread them across my kitchen table that night like I was trying to solve a crime, which, as it turned out, I basically was. The Ashford Home Furnishings account was there, opened 6 years and 2 months earlier when I was 24. Below it, 4 more accounts I didn't recognize at all. A Nordstrom store card opened the same year, balance 0, paid off. A Discover card opened 3 years ago, current balance $8,600. A personal loan through a company called Brightline Lending for $12,000, taken out 4 years earlier, marked paid as agreed until 18 months ago when it started showing missed payments. And a second furniture retailer account, this one from a company called Cascade Home Interiors, opened 5 years earlier, already paid off in full. 5 accounts. Nearly $40,000 in combined credit extended in my name over 6 years, 2 of them now delinquent, 1 of them already sent to collections. My credit score, which I'd checked exactly once before, back when I was applying for my first apartment lease at 23, and it had read a healthy 712, now sat at 538. Poor. Barely above the floor. I sat at that kitchen table for over an hour, cross-referencing dates against my own memory, trying to figure out where I even was, what I was doing, the year each account opened. The Ashford account, 6 years ago, that was the year I just moved into my first apartment, still finishing my accounting certification at night. The Nordstrom card that same year, a few months later. The Cascade Home Interiors account, 5 years ago, I remembered that year clearly. because it was the year my grandmother passed away, and I'd taken 3 weeks of bereavement leave, distracted and grieving, the furthest thing from paying close attention to financial paperwork that wasn't directly in front of me. Whoever had done this hadn't picked random moments. Looking back at it now, every single account had opened during a stretch of my life when I was distracted, grieving, moving, or simply too busy and too trusting to be looking closely. I don't think that was intentional targeting exactly. I think it was something quieter and sadder than that, someone who knew me well enough to know exactly when I wasn't paying attention because they'd raised me. I called my mother that night, my hands still shaking, and asked her as calmly as I could manage whether she knew anything about any of this. There was a pause on the line just slightly too long to be innocent. "Natalie, honey," she said, "let's not do this over the phone." I drove to Naperville that weekend. My mother, Carmen, met me at the door with a face already arranged into an apology, which told me before she said a single word that this wasn't a misunderstanding she was about to clear up. It was a confession she was about to manage. "It was never supposed to get this out of hand," she said, sitting me down at the same kitchen table I'd done my homework on as a kid. "Your father's hours got cut back when the plant restructured 6-7 years ago now. We were behind on everything. And you had good credit and we didn't, and I really believed, Natalie, that we'd pay it all back before you ever even had to know." "You used my social security number," I said. "Not just my name, my actual social security number, to open accounts. That's not borrowing, that's identity theft, Mom, that's a federal crime." She flinched at the word, visibly like I'd slapped her. "Don't say it like that," she said. "We're your parents, it's not the same thing." "It's exactly the same thing," I said. "The law doesn't have a family exception." My father, Hector, was in the next room the entire time, and he didn't come in until I raised my voice. When he finally did, he stood in the doorway rather than sitting down, arms crossed, and said the sentence that I think, looking back, was the actual moment something in me went cold and decided this needed to become more than a family argument. "We always paid the minimums," he said. "We never let it get bad enough to hurt you. Until recently." He said it like it was a defense. Like 6 years of secretly borrowing against my identity was acceptable as long as the minimum payments were technically on time. "Do you understand what this has already done?" I asked him. "My credit score dropped almost 200 points in the last 18 months alone because of an account I didn't even know existed until 3 days ago. That's not nothing, Dad. That follows me. That affects whether I can rent an apartment, get approved for a car loan, someday buy a house." "We were going to fix it," he said again, the same sentence he'd apparently been telling himself for 6 years. "We were always going to fix it before it touched anything real." "It's already touched something real," I said. "It touched me 6 years ago." My mother reached across the table and tried to take my hand. I pulled it back, not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely wasn't ready yet for that kind of gesture to mean what it was supposed to mean. I asked the obvious question, the one that had been sitting in my chest since I first saw the credit report. "How did you even get statements for 6 years without me finding out? I would have seen mail, emails, something." My mother's answer came out slowly, reluctantly, like she'd hoped I wouldn't ask. "When you moved into your first apartment, you asked us to forward anything that still came to the house here, remember? Because you hadn't updated your address everywhere yet." I did remember that, a completely normal 6-week arrangement while I finished changing my address on file with banks, my license, subscriptions, all the boring administrative fallout of moving out at 22. "We just never told the accounts to stop sending things here," she continued. "And most of it went paperless anyway once we set up the online logins. You never saw a single statement because there was never a paper one to see, and the email addresses on file weren't yours." That last detail hit me harder than almost anything else she'd said. "What email addresses?" she hesitated. "We set up a new account, under your name but an email only we had access to, Natalie R. Finance, at a free email provider for the notifications." An email account. Created in my name that I never knew existed, specifically so that 6 years of credit card statements, loan documents, and collections notices could flow into a mailbox I'd never once opened, because I didn't know it was mine. I asked her to give me the login. She actually had to think about the password for a moment before she remembered it, which told me something too, that this had become such an ordinary part of her routine over 6 years that she barely had to think about it anymore. It had stopped feeling to her like something extraordinary at all. I asked her one more question before I left that night, mostly because I needed to understand the scale of what I was walking into. Did Dad know about the email account too, or was that just you? We set it up together, she said. In the beginning, at least. After that, I was mostly the one who checked it and handled the payments. Your father dealt with the applications themselves. A small, quiet division of labor, apparently agreed upon at some point I would never get to witness, between two people who'd raised me to believe that honesty was the most basic expectation of any relationship, family included. I logged into that email account from my car in my parents' driveway before I'd even left, because I couldn't wait to get home to do it. 6 years of my financial life that I'd never known existed, sitting in a mailbox with my own name attached to it, opened and read and managed by somebody else. There were welcome emails for each of the 5 accounts, payment confirmations, occasional late payment notices, 17 of them across 6 years, each one apparently resolved before things got bad enough to hit my actual credit report until recently. And then, buried about 2 years deep in the archive, a thread that made my stomach drop in a completely different way than anything before it. An email from Cascade Home Interiors confirming a delivery. Dining set, sectional sofa, bedroom furniture, total order value $19,400, financed through the account opened in my name. Delivery address. My sister Brianna's new townhouse, the one she'd moved into right after getting engaged. I called Brianna that night. She's 2 years younger than me and we'd always been close, or at least I thought we had been. Did you know, I asked her, trying to keep my voice steady, that the furniture in your living room was bought using credit opened in my name without my knowledge? The silence on her end was different from my mother's. Longer, guiltier. Nat, she finally said, I thought it was a loan Mom and Dad took out themselves. I didn't know it was under your name specifically until a while after it was already delivered. And by then I didn't know what to do with that information. I'm sorry, I should have told you. That was the moment the layers really started peeling back. It wasn't just my parents managing a private financial emergency in the shadows. It had funded my sister's home, at least in part, and she had known not from the start but for a while and said nothing. I thought back uncomfortably to Brianna's engagement party 18 months earlier, held in that same townhouse, everyone admiring the new sectional sofa. My mother beaming about how the girls really landed on their feet. I remembered complimenting the dining set myself, sitting at it, eating off it, with absolutely no idea that the loan financing it had my name and my social security number attached to it, accruing interest I would eventually be the one legally responsible for if it ever went unpaid. Does Mom know that you know? I asked Brianna. I don't think so, she said. I never told her I'd figured it out. I just let it keep going because by the time I understood what it actually was, the furniture was already delivered, already ours, and telling you felt like it would blow everything up. I know how that sounds. I know it doesn't make it okay. It didn't make it okay, but it did tell me something important going forward, that whatever I decided to do about this wasn't going to just involve 2 people. It was going to touch every corner of my family, whether I wanted it to or not. The Brightline Lending personal loan was the one that worried me most, both because of the dollar amount and because, unlike the store cards, it required a formal application with income verification. Someone had submitted pay stubs, or something that looked like pay stubs, in my name to qualify for $12,000 in unsecured credit. I called Brightline's customer service line and after nearly 40 minutes on hold, finally reached a fraud specialist named Priya Anand, who pulled up the original application while we spoke. The application lists your employer as Lakeshore Medical Group, she said, with a stated annual income of $81,000 and includes an uploaded pay stub as verification. I'd worked at Lakeshore Medical Group briefly, 3 years before this loan was taken out, in an administrative role that paid nowhere near $81,000 a year. Someone had taken an old pay stub of mine, probably from the same filing cabinet or folder where old documents like that end up living in a family home, and altered the numbers before submitting it. Can you tell whether the document was edited? I asked. I can request our document forensics team pull the metadata, Priya said. Uploaded PDFs sometimes retain information about the software used to create or modify them. 2 weeks later, Brightline's fraud department confirmed what I already suspected. The uploaded pay stub had been edited using a basic PDF editing tool, with the modification timestamp showing it had been altered 9 days before the loan application was submitted, and the file's metadata listed the document's original author, buried in a field almost nobody thinks to check, as H. Ray's, my father's initials. My father's name, quietly embedded in the digital fingerprint of a forged pay stub used to steal $12,000 in my name. Priya walked me through exactly how they'd found it, patiently, like she could tell I needed the mechanics explained slowly. Most PDF editing software embeds what's called metadata into the file, information about who created it, what program was used, when it was last modified. Most people never think to check it because it's invisible unless you go looking. Whoever edited this pay stub used a basic, free PDF editor and never cleared the metadata afterward. It's a mistake we see fairly often, honestly. People think changing the numbers on the page is enough. I asked her what happens next procedurally from Brightline's side. We'll close the account and remove it from your credit history once we confirm your identity theft affidavit, she said. And because the falsified document itself constitutes loan fraud on our end, not just identity theft, we're required to refer this internally for potential fraud prosecution, separate from whatever you decide to pursue personally. That last part hadn't fully occurred to me before that call, that this wasn't only going to be a fight I chose to wage myself. Once certain institutions found forged documents in their own files, they had their own obligations to act, whether I wanted them to or not. When I confronted my father with this specific piece of evidence, not vague suspicion, an actual forensic detail with his own initials attached, he didn't deny it the way he had everything else. He just went very quiet and said, "I didn't think anyone would ever look that closely. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters more than the legal details." For almost 3 weeks after that conversation with my father, I genuinely considered doing nothing. Just quietly paying off the delinquent accounts myself, closing the credit, and never speaking of it again. Part of that was shame, if I'm being truthful. There's an embarrassment to discovering your own parents used your identity like a spare credit card for 6 years that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. Part of it was fear of what reporting it formally would actually do to my family, to my aging father's already fragile pride, to my mother's health, which had never been great, to whatever relationship I still had left with my sister. What changed my mind wasn't outrage. It was practical, almost mundane. I'd been quietly saving for 2 years to buy a small condo of my own, and 3 weeks after that phone call from Todd Bryce, I got pre-approval denied by my mortgage lender, citing my credit score and a debt-to-income ratio inflated by accounts I'd never opened and debts I'd never actually incurred. That's when this stopped being a private family matter I could quietly absorb and became something with a real, unavoidable cost to my own future. I wasn't going to let 6 years of my parents' secrecy cost me a home I'd spent 2 years honestly saving for. I called a close friend from college, Danielle, who'd gone through her own messy financial dispute a few years back, though hers had been with an ex rather than a parent. She listened to the entire thing without interrupting, and then said something that ended up reframing the whole decision for me. "You keep talking about this like reporting it is something you'd be doing to them," she said. "What if it's actually something you'd be doing for you? Those aren't the same thing, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." I sat with that distinction for days afterward. It didn't make the decision easy, but it made it feel, for the first time, like a decision that was actually allowed to be about me. I filed a report with the Federal Trade Commission through identitytheft.gov, laying out every account, every date, every dollar amount I'd documented. The FTC report generates something called an identity theft affidavit, a legal document that becomes the backbone of disputing fraudulent accounts with both the credit bureaus and the original creditors. I also, on the advice of a consumer protection attorney named Melissa Grant, whom I found through a local bar association referral line, filed a police report with the Naperville Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. I want to be clear that this wasn't a decision I made lightly or quickly. I sat with it for days, but Melissa was direct with me about why it mattered beyond just the paperwork. "A police report gives the fraudulent accounts a case number," she explained during our first consultation. "That case number is what most creditors and all 3 credit bureaus actually require before they'll fully remove fraudulent accounts from your file, rather than just placing a dispute flag on them. Without it, you're stuck in a slower, weaker process that can drag on for years and still leave marks on your report. The detective assigned to my case, a woman named Lisa Farrow from the Financial Crimes Unit, was matter-of-fact in a way I actually found comforting. "I've seen this exact pattern more times than you'd think," she told me during our first interview. "Family members using a relative's identity, usually starting small, usually justified in their own minds as temporary. It rarely stays small, and it's almost never actually temporary. I need you to walk me through every account, every document in order." I did. It took almost 3 hours. By the end of it, Detective Farrow had what she needed to open a formal investigation, not against a stranger, but against my own mother and father, whose names were now sitting in a case file next to the word suspects. Detective Farrow's investigation moved slower than I expected, mostly because financial fraud cases involving family members carry their own particular complications: subpoenas for banking records, coordination with 3 separate credit bureaus, verification requests to 2 different lenders. About 6 weeks in, she called me with an update that added an entirely new layer to what I already knew. "We subpoenaed the original application file from Cascade Home Interiors for the account opened 5 years ago," she said. "It also included an income verification document, also allegedly your pay stub, also edited." A second forged document. Not a coincidence, not an isolated slip. A demonstrated pattern of my father specifically fabricating income verification paperwork in my name across multiple lenders, over multiple years, each time using a slightly updated version of the same old genuine pay stub as his template. What made this discovery different from the Brightline one wasn't just that it existed, it was the date. The Cascade Home Interiors account had been opened 5 years earlier, a full year before the Brightline loan, and I realized doing the math, only about 8 months after I'd moved out of my parents' house entirely and stopped giving them any reason at all to still have access to my old pay stubs, my old mail, my old identity documents. This meant the 6-year timeline I thought I understood actually started even earlier and more deliberately than I'd first believed. It wasn't a slow, reluctant slide into desperation that began with the plant layoffs my mother described. The first forged document predated that explanation by nearly a year. I asked my mother about this discrepancy directly, over a phone call I recorded with her knowledge and consent, on Melissa's advice, for the case file. This time her explanation shifted. "There were money problems before the layoffs too," she admitted quietly. "Your father's overtime had already been cut back significantly the year before. We just didn't want to worry you with it that early. I suppose once it worked the first time without you ever noticing, it got easier to justify doing it again. Once it worked the first time, it got easier to justify doing it again." That sentence told me more about the actual mechanics of what had happened to me over 6 years than almost anything else in the entire case file. It wasn't a single crisis that spiraled out of control. It was a pattern that had proven quietly that it worked, that I never checked, never noticed, never asked. And a pattern like that, once it's been tested and gone unnoticed, doesn't stay contained. It grows exactly as far as it's allowed to. I asked Detective Farrow during our next check-in call whether this kind of escalating pattern was typical in the cases she'd worked. "More than people expect," she said. "The first instance is usually small and genuinely feels temporary to the person doing it. It's the absence of consequences more than the presence of desperation that tends to be what makes it continue. If nobody ever finds out the first time, there's very little internal reason to stop before the second, third, or 6th time." That framing stuck with me. It wasn't really 6 years of one continuous crisis. It was 6 separate decisions, each one made easier by the fact that the one before it had gone completely unnoticed. Armed with the FTC affidavit, the police case number, and Detective Farrow's growing file, Melissa Grant helped me formally dispute all 5 accounts with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion simultaneously, along with direct fraud disputes filed with Ashford Home Furnishings, Cascade Home Interiors, Nordstrom, Discover, and Brightline Lending. The process was slower and more frustrating than I expected, and I want to be honest about that, because I think stories like this sometimes make it sound cleaner than it actually is. Nordstrom and Cascade, both already paid off in full, removed their trade lines from my report within about 3 weeks with minimal pushback. since there was no outstanding financial harm to them either way. Discover took nearly 2 months, and one formal appeal after their first dispute review came back, verified as accurate, based solely on the fact that minimum payments had been made consistently for years, which their system apparently read as evidence of legitimate account ownership rather than evidence of someone else quietly managing my debt. Ashford Home Furnishings, the original collection account that started all of this, fought the hardest. Their collections partner, Meridian Recovery Solutions, the same company Todd Bryce worked for, initially refused to close the account, citing the same 6-year history of consistent authorized activity as proof it wasn't fraud. It took Melissa sending a formal cease and desist letter citing violations of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, combined with the police case number and forensic pay stub findings from Brightline, before Ashford finally agreed to close the account and formally notify the bureaus it had been the result of identity theft. 4 months after that first call from Todd Bryce. Brightline was the most cooperative of all of them, largely because their own internal fraud team had done the forensic work that helped build my case in the first place. They closed the account, removed it from my credit history entirely, and separately referred the matter internally as a potential fraud case against the person who submitted the falsified documentation. Meaning, my father was now facing scrutiny not just from Detective Farrow, but from Brightline's own legal department as well. By the 5th month, 4 of the 5 accounts were fully removed from my credit file. My score had climbed back to 640, still short of where it had been, but climbing. The mortgage lender who denied my pre-approval agreed to reconsider my application once I could show documentation of the dispute resolutions in progress. I want to be honest about how tedious this stretch actually was, because it's the part of stories like this that often gets skipped over. There were entire weeks that summer where my evenings consisted of nothing but hold music, reference numbers, and faxing documents to fraud departments that still, somehow in this day and age, only accept faxes. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm a compliance administrator. Spreadsheets are how I process stress, logging every phone call, every representative's name, every case number, every promised callback that never actually came. There were nights I genuinely wondered whether it would have been easier, financially and emotionally, to have just quietly paid everything off myself and never told anyone what I'd found. But every time that thought surfaced, I reminded myself of the mortgage denial letter still sitting in my email, and I kept going. Detective Farrow called me almost 5 months to the day after my first interview with her, to let me know the case had been formally referred to the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office for a charging decision against my father specifically, based primarily on the forged pay stub evidence tied directly to his initials in the document metadata. My mother was investigated as well, but the evidence against her was murkier. She'd known, she'd benefited, she'd helped manage the email account and forwarded mail, but the actual falsified documents all traced back to my father's devices and his identifiable digital fingerprint. The prosecutor's office ultimately decided her conduct, while deeply wrong, didn't clear the same evidentiary bar for a standalone identity theft charge on its own, though it remained relevant to any civil restitution proceedings. I was asked formally whether I wanted to pursue the criminal case to its full conclusion, or whether I'd support a plea arrangement instead. I sat with that question for almost 2 weeks before I gave Melissa my answer. I told her I wanted restitution more than I wanted a courtroom. I wanted every dollar of the remaining Discover balance, currently still showing $8,600 against my name until fully resolved, paid back directly, on a documented, court-enforceable schedule. I wanted a permanent, written acknowledgement on record that my identity had been used without my consent. And I wanted my father to understand, through consequences that were real but not vindictive, that this couldn't simply be absorbed and forgotten the way 17 years of small late payments apparently had been. My father ultimately accepted a plea agreement. A felony identity theft charge reduced to a lesser offense in exchange for a guilty plea, 2 years of probation, mandatory restitution covering the remaining balance plus my legal fees, and a formal restitution order enforceable through wage garnishment if payments lapsed. Melissa was careful to walk me through what I was and wasn't giving up by choosing restitution over pushing for the harsher original felony charge. "You won't get the same public accountability a trial verdict might provide," she said. but you'll almost certainly get your money back faster and with far less financial and emotional cost to yourself in the process. Trials are expensive and unpredictable, even when the evidence is strong. I want you to choose this because it's genuinely what serves you, not because you feel obligated to spare your father the harsher outcome. I sat with that distinction for a long time before I answered her. In the end, my decision wasn't really about sparing him. It was about what I actually wanted to be true a year from now, whether I wanted to still be tangled in a courtroom battle over my own name, or whether I wanted my name, and my credit, and my life finally back in my own hands as quickly and completely as possible. Restitution got me there faster. That mattered more to me than watching him stand trial. I saw my father in person for the first time in almost 4 months on the day of his plea hearing, standing outside the DuPage County Courthouse in a suit I recognized from my college graduation, looking smaller than I remembered him being. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't undo 6 years," he said, once the hearing had ended and we were standing awkwardly near the parking structure. "I keep trying to figure out the moment I could have stopped and told you the truth instead, and there wasn't just one moment. There were dozens. I let every single one of them pass. Why didn't you ever just ask me?" I asked him, and I meant it as a real question, not a rhetorical one. "I would have helped if you'd asked. Not $40,000 worth maybe, but something, honestly." He was quiet for a long moment. "Because asking would have meant admitting I couldn't provide for this family the way I always told myself I could," he finally said. "It felt easier to just borrow the version of you that still believed I could. Borrow the version of you that still believed I could." I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me during the entire ordeal. It wasn't really about the money, in the end, not entirely. It was about a man so unwilling to let his children see him as anything other than capable that he was willing to quietly steal from one of us rather than admit the truth to any of us. It's been just over a year since Todd Bryce called me about a furniture account I'd never opened. My father completed the first 8 months of his probation without incident, and the restitution payments have come through on schedule so far, garnished directly from his part-time consulting income, which is honestly the only reason I have any confidence they'll continue at all. My mother was never criminally charged, but she agreed, through Melissa, to a separate civil restitution agreement covering her portion of what remains owed, paid in smaller installments alongside my father's. My sister Brianna and I are still working through what happened, more slowly than I expected. She eventually paid me back a portion of the furniture's value out of her own savings, unprompted, about 4 months after our first difficult phone call, along with a handwritten letter that I still have, sitting in the drawer of my new condo's kitchen table. The condo I finally closed on 7 months ago, after my credit score climbed back above 680 and my mortgage application was approved on the second attempt. I don't check that old email account anymore. I had it permanently deleted, along with formally documenting its existence as part of my FTC affidavit, so there's a legal record it existed and who had access to it, even though the account itself is gone now. My relationship with my parents exists now in a smaller, more careful shape than it used to. We talk occasionally. My mother calls on Sundays, mostly about ordinary things, the weather, a neighbor's new dog, whether I'm sleeping enough. I answer most weeks. I haven't been back to the house in Naperville since the day of the plea hearing, though. I'm not sure yet when or if that will change. Detective Farrow told me something during our last conversation that I still think about occasionally. Most people in your position, once the accounts are cleared and the legal stuff is finished, want to move on and pretend it never happened, she said. The ones who actually recover fastest, in my experience, are the ones who let themselves keep checking. Not obsessively, just regularly. It stops being a wound and starts being a habit. I've taken that advice more seriously than almost anything else anyone told me during this entire year. I pull my credit report every 3 months now, on a calendar reminder, the same way I'd schedule a dentist appointment, not out of fear anymore, just out of ordinary, unremarkable diligence. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty for how far I took this, the police report, the criminal referral, watching my own father stand in front of a judge. I understand why they ask. It's a fair question. But here's what I keep coming back to. For 6 years, my name, my social security number, my entire financial identity was treated as a resource that belonged to whoever needed it most urgently, rather than as something that belonged to me. Nobody asked. Nobody warned me. I found out entirely by accident, from a stranger named Todd Bryce reading a delinquent balance off a script, and if he hadn't called that particular Tuesday, I genuinely don't know how many more years it would have continued, or how much closer to true financial ruin it would have carried me before anyone noticed. Real trust, the kind that actually survives contact with hard times, doesn't get to skip the step where you ask. It doesn't get to quietly borrow someone else's name and simply hope to pay it back before they ever notice. I don't think my parents set out 6 years ago to hurt me. I think they were scared and ashamed and looking for the path of least immediate resistance, and I happened to be standing closest to that path with a good credit score and no idea any of this was happening. That doesn't excuse it, but it does help me understand it, and understanding it slowly is what's letting me build something new with them now, smaller, more honest, built on documentation and boundaries instead of blind trust, but real and mine, in a way the last 6 years quietly weren't. I think about Todd Bryce sometimes, oddly enough, a stranger reading a script off a screen, with no idea he was about to unravel 6 years of my family's carefully maintained silence with a single routine phone call about a furniture account. I don't know his story, I don't know if he has any idea what that one call set in motion, but I've come to think there was something almost fitting about the truth arriving that way, not through a grand confession, not through some dramatic discovery, just an ordinary, slightly awkward phone call on an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of call that happens to thousands of people every single day, most of whom really do owe the money being asked about. I didn't, and finding that out, as uncomfortable and disorienting as it was, ended up being the beginning of getting my name and my future entirely back into my own hands. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Check your own credit report, even if you trust every single person who's ever had access to your mail. Trust and verification were never opposites. Sometimes the second one is what protects the first. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and reflective purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. If this story affected you, we hope it offered a moment of reflection on trust, financial boundaries, and the importance of monitoring your own credit and identity.